There you are.
There I am.
How's your day?
So far, so good. I did a
Awesome.
really interesting reading this morning on a lady who thought that she was born standard time, not daylight time. So we had delayed it. So I did it, and she said I could use it on YouTube. But
Oh,
very interesting chart.
wow.
Such an empath.
Hmm.
And so it's just very interesting. So
Yeah.
I love doing it and
Right?
making a difference, and then looking at the astrology and seeing the timing. And
Yeah. Yeah. I feel similar. Yeah. That experience of offering new information or a new perspective and people can adjust and welcome themselves differently.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
really so interesting.
Well, shall we dive in?
Let's dive in.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for wanting to be in this space together for our free conference, the September High Desert Human Design Conference coming up in September. So excited. And context-wise, you and I had a conversation about a week ago where you kind of walked me through how you're working with the information that came to Raw. And I don't know that I've said this to you since, but that day I was in a bubble. I felt like there was a transmission that had come through and like I had a new perspective on who I am in a very like divine and transformative internal way. And like
Interesting.
I messaged my buddy and I was like, "Oh my God, I feel like I just got this beautiful transmission." And she was like, "Can you tell me about it?" And I was like, "Not yet," because it was so much, trying to yeah, let my system kind of reorient. And I left feeling very empowered and very felt and seen. So
And
thank you for that.
what's happened since to that
Mm.
energy?
Oh, good question. I think I'm holding multiple places, honestly, because there's a way of understanding how you're working with this information that's like feels different and feels curious to me. So
Mhm.
when I was with the same friend and we were talking about it, I was like, but does this mean I go in this completely different direction or am I still here, but maybe I'm going so it's like I'm calibrating. So that's like the mind part of it.
Mhm.
But in my system, I feel stronger. I
Mhm.
feel more permission. There was a couple of things that you said that I was like, kind of that like, what the fuck? That kind of
Right.
empowered energy. Um, yeah, because I think the biggest takeaway for me was how I think the difference is that you're bringing in the Chiron placement. And for me, that's what makes my energy operate differently from a generator to a manifesting generator. And specifically in my chart, activates my 45. So now I have the channel of money. So I have 4521 through this perspective. So that means I have my ego. So it's a big like whoa, whoa. So still integrating for sure. I'm super curious to dive in and
Yeah.
yeah.
It, the four worlds
Mm.
have proven to be a huge key clinically for me, uh,
Ah.
because in my work as a clinician, uh, and especially specializing in couples and relationships, there were always times where the communication would break down and I wouldn't understand why. And
Ah.
as I began to realize that, for one thing, my charts delineated as four worlds,
Uh-huh.
and I didn't expect that.
Mm.
It was a surprise to me. And I also hadn't realized that my PhD was in the four worlds.
Ah.
So everything, Steve Jobs said you can't know until you retrospectively connect the dots.
Got it.
And it took these 25 years with design to
Mm,
realize that what I was ending up with was validation that we psychologically live in four worlds.
mm,
And those four worlds, mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical,
mhm,
are delineated by the astrological calculations that differentiate critical periods in human development.
mhm,
And those are, when I did the calculations to get the missing sleep design, um, and used my twin kittens to do it. So I was able to get it to about 10 seconds
mm,
of differential. And that was able to identify the differential between them physiologically.
mm,
So that's the physical matrix. But when I got the calculations, I wasn't expecting them to delineate critical periods in early human development. But then using that shows me that by the time a baby is 3 months old, every cosmic energy in the zodiac has been imprinted into their aura.
mm,
So as I expanded the system developmentally, I realized that at 3 months of age, a baby, if in composite, has everything they need to manifest their full potential.
mm,
And 95% or more of the population are manifesting generators.
mm,
So, what I look at in my work is what is the progression of energy from birth, well, pre birth to birth, and early, late pregnancy, starting a week before birth when the spirit comes in
mhm,
and anchors. I'm not saying that a baby doesn't have a spirit before a week, but it's not really registering
mm,
in the same way. So it was a surprise to me statistically and scientifically to see that the physiologic literature, the psychological literature, the astrology that I came up with, and the developmental sequences all correspond.
mm,
So that further validates the structure of the body graph.
mm,
And there were things inside the body graph that were not valid in the scientific testing, but the body graph itself, with its centers and its shapes and the sacred geometry of the body graph itself that was given to Ra,
mm.
holds.
Got it. And I wonder, I don't know if you saw my face light up when you said twins, because that part of the conversation when you were giving me the scope or the mountain view of the four worlds, that kitten story was very impactful for me. And I'm wondering if you'd be open to sharing that again.
Absolutely. Um, Let me start with the history of them.
Please.
This guy,
Ah.
Noble, my logo for Noble Energy Maps and Noble Energy Wellness.
Uh-huh.
When I was when I graduated from college, I wanted a cat,
Mm,
and I'd never had a cat because my mother was very allergic,
mm,
and I was allergic to cats, but I wanted a cat. So it wasn't time. I went to graduate school, and second year of graduate school, I really wanted a Siamese cat,
oh,
and it
Siamese.
and Siamese because my downstairs neighbor had a Siamese cat,
Mm.
and I loved it.
Aw.
So I uh, started looking for a cat. I went to a rescue and there were no cats available. And anyhow, I found Noble
Mm,
and I knew nothing about cats.
mm,
So, first night, Saturday night, I came home. My husband was in the other room and I was ready to go to sleep. And I lay down and he jumped on the bed. And
mm.
I went, I don't want a cat on my bed.
Ah.
and I put him down and he jumped up again. And
Hmm.
this went on many, many times.
Yeah.
And finally, he went to the foot of the bed and he leaped at my head like this,
Mm.
looked in my eyes. And I looked in his eyes, and the words that came were, okay, I got it.
Mm.
And I knew he would never hurt me.
Mm.
And there was a connection between us unlike anything else.
Yeah.
So he was my protector.
Mm.
He slept with me every night.
Mm.
He lived to be 22.
Mm.
When I did groups, um, well, for one thing, when I was in graduate school, he gave me the courage.
Mm.
I was studying Jung. Nobody studied Jung. I
Uh-huh.
was teaching Jung in my personality theory class when I was teaching college, and nobody was teaching Jung.
Mm.
He was given one paragraph in the personality books, and I
Interesting.
wanted to become a Jungian analyst.
Mm.
So I started writing about Jung and doing that work.
Mm.
So it took courage when nobody was doing it. And he gave me the courage. And I felt that he was such pure love
Mm.
that if he loved me so unconditionally, I had to be okay.
Mm.
So he inspired me.
Mm.
Anyhow, um, he took care of my kids when they were born. He
Ah.
guarded my daughter in her crib.
Mm.
He would go after anyone if they raised their voice to me.
Mm.
Um, and then when I started doing weekend group therapy, starting Friday night and going till Sunday night, um, hold on, I have to get Mac back. Uh, uh, my dog. I'm the only one home.
Uh-huh.
Uh, so he would go to the person who I needed to work on next, and he
Mm.
would put his paw right where that person was hurting,
Mhm.
and he'd look at me.
Mhm.
Everyone in the group got a cat. So he was not a regular being.
Yeah. Can I ask you a
When,
question about the paw?
yeah,
I've uh, I've studied a little bit about samskaras. Do you know that term?
mm-mm.
Okay. We can skip it then. It's basically like an entry point or like
Okay.
a trauma that's been carried
Yes,
for
yes,
lineages. And so I'm curious, I've done, like a body of work that I've explored is you would hover or not hover, but you would sit over a person who's lying down and you would feel yourself be drawn to potentially their samskaras. And so I'm curious if that's what this animal was
yes, that's
doing.
what he was doing. He was picking up.
Hmm.
Noble was such pure spirit
Yeah.
that he would go to where the spirit needed healing,
Mm.
and he would put his paw, and I would, because I was so tuned into spirit, I
Hmm.
would use a language that was clean. You
Hmm.
know, what do you know about this? Or what does this remind you of?
Hmm.
And I would use music and songs. I was very creative in my groups. I loved doing my groups. And Noble helped me. When he died, I stopped doing them. I couldn't,
Mm.
a
Hmm.
month after he died, I couldn't do them anymore.
Got it.
So when he died, the vet who took care of him for the year before he died said to me, if you've never had kittens, you have to have kittens.
Hmm.
I said, okay. So we got Sergi and we got a female,
Hmm.
Holly, and we mated them.
Mm.
And Holly had one kitten and four kittens died. She needed a
Ah,
C-section. Marvin assisted. It was a nightmare.
yeah.
And Holly was such, you know, a spirit. She would fetch powder puffs endlessly.
Yes.
And so she had Noah. and one kitten. And so my friend said to me, it shouldn't be this way. Do it
Mm.
again.
Mm.
It should be easy. It should be, you know. So we got another female
Mm.
to mate with Holly's son.
Mm.
And Fluff had 6 kittens.
Mm.
My son happened to be home from college when she
Mm.
had them,
Mm.
January 18th, 1990. And um, so Charles recorded the times to the second.
Wow.
And there were twins.
Huh.
Chester and Ruzel were identical twins.
Wow.
When they were um, babies, I kept their weights, and
Oh.
they were isolated, and 6 kittens. And we then had 13 cats in the house. So it was insane. And Fluff was such a protective mother that she
Mm.
would chase the other cats out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So I would weigh the twins in order to know who was who. And I used a Sharpie to make a mark so I could tell them apart.
Mm.
So Joe died at age 10 of
Mm.
cardiomyopathy, and Ruzel lived to be 18.
Uh-huh.
Cardiomyopathy, such as Joe had, was supposedly genetic. So when Ra gave me in 1999 the dream rave,
Uh-huh.
and he said the only thing he knew about it was that the voice told him, well, Barley was under his desk
Oh, the
when
dog.
the dog, and he said to the voice, if this is a human design, what about my dog?
Mm.
And the voice said, when we sleep, we move into a mammalian matrix like a dog. And the mammalian matrix is 15 gate. And that's what happens when we sleep, when we
Mm.
dream. So Ra gave it to me. He said, I don't know what to do with this. I don't think it means anything. Here, you know.
Mm.
And I immediately noticed that there was a difference if someone was sacrally defined in their waking and undefined in their sleep versus the other way around.
Huh.
And I tested it with some clients. And I said to Ra, when you change when you sleep, it makes a difference in how you function. And he didn't really want to know from it. And then I taught the first class on the dream rave in November of 1999. And I explained that there's a change and that there was still a piece missing
Mm.
because Rod didn't know sleep architecture and the voice didn't explain it to him.
Mm.
So in January of 2000, I did a lecture with a seminar with Ra. We had about 100 people, and I taught the sleep architecture and the dream rave. And Ra, at that point, was able to come up with some keynotes.
Ah.
He didn't have any keynotes.
Uh-huh.
He had to download them or work with me to get them.
Mm.
So I realized when I read the books on the sleep architecture and began to think about how it would work in design, that we were missing the sleep layer.
Mm.
If we had when we're as a human, when we dream, we're in REM. And when we're in REM, rapid eye movement, there is movement between the sleeping brain and the waking brain. And we know from brain scans that there's carryover. So I always put the REM design vertical because there's carryover between the worlds.
Mm.
But the dream design is not the sleep design because the dream design has a cortex,
Mm.
because there's carryover. Even though it's a trace, we have to come into the 64 gate matrix for that to happen. But when we're horizontal, we have no ajna or crown or solar plexus. So
Mm.
I needed that calculation. And where did you get it? Well, I'm an astrologer. So, and I had learned astrology before computers.
Ah.
So I knew how to calculate by
Hmm.
hand.
Hmm.
So I already had the emotional matrix, which is a 33 gate matrix that I had spoken to Ra about. And I had said, Ra, I'm getting that there's another matrix. And he said, yeah. I said, it's a matrix that brings us inspiration. He said, yeah, the voice told him that, but didn't give it to him. I got it.
Mm.
So there's the four matrices. And when I did the calculations, I used the solar, 88 solar degrees, logic, 88 lunar degrees. So that's what Ra gave me. And then I took it to the next layer of specificity, the solar minute and the lunar minute.
Mm.
So it's the next, um, it's like minutes and seconds. So
Mm.
if we want to be more exacting on a birth time, for example, we would go to the seconds.
Got it.
So that's what I did. And when I laid those out, and Eric Memmert was in my office with me, he was visiting me, and we were doing different calculations to see what would differentiate my twin kittens. Was that?
Mm.
And when I did this solar, lunar, solar minute, lunar minute, and Eric laid it out, and I did prenatal and postnatal because I knew that a baby is now considered still, it's like the missing fourth trimester of pregnancy in the
Ah.
first 3 months of life because their gastrointestinal system is not developed and their cortex is still developing.
Mhm.
And so until they're 3 months of age, they're considered a neonate and then they're a baby. So I figured, what the hell, I'll do, you know, pre and post. And
Mhm.
when I laid them out, I got developmental times in early human development. Remember, I'm a developmental psychologist,
Right.
among other things.
Right.
So I went, holy shit, this explains it. It explained things about my son. It explained things,
Mm.
it showed that I was a lunar generator. And I had said to Ra over and over again, Ra, I'm not a manifester.
Ah.
And then here it was, I'm a lunar generator. So it explained me to me. It
Hmm.
explained why I had said to my husband years before, Marvin, there's only one thing I die for, and that's love.
Mm.
It was right there in my
Mm.
chart. So I immediately, just with my immediate family, had confirmation of things I couldn't see any other way. And then I'm a scientist and I was a clinician. So I had charts on every single patient I had ever seen
Hmm.
because I started studying astrology before I even went into private practice. So once I went into private practice, I had my mentor astrologer, Catherine DeJersey, do charts on all my clients.
Mm.
And so I had thousands of charts.
Yeah.
And what did I do? I pulled the charts of all my clients
Hmm.
in the multidimensional designs. I laid them all out on my floor in my
Yeah.
room, and I knew their dreams because I'm a Jungian analyst. So I had dreams, I had data, and I'm looking at these charts going, this is unbelievable.
Mhm.
It explained everything
Mm.
of who these people were and where their issues were and who kept saying to me, I pick up things or I'm psychic right there in the charts.
Mm, mm,
So I started working with them. Uh, it Ross said in the book we did, the transcripts from January 2000, the first dream seminar. He
mm,
said, we have Eleanor to thank for
mm,
showing us that unless we integrate the matrices, we don't know how the physical, for example, is affecting the mental.
mm.
Or he said, the design. Um, so he didn't have the lingo, he didn't have the language, but he began to recognize that without integrating the matrices of the world, we were missing functional information about people.
Yeah.
And so I've been working with the multidimensional noble energy maps for 20 years.
Mm,
And the, yeah, that's them. And those are the different matrices.
mhm,
So you can see that the mental world has all 64 gates. The spiritual world is 15 gates. And this is, I put them up standing up rather than horizontal, because when we are in our waking state, even though the matrices activate only certain gates, if a different gate in the 64 gate matrix is activated, it functions as a transit for us.
mm.
So I like to see what is being activated that is influencing the unconscious in our conscious life.
Mm,
And what I mostly look for is the flow of energy. Where is it in the mental world? And does it stay or leave in the spiritual world? And you can see in looking at the matrices that the spiritual world does not have the crown and the ajna,
mhm.
but the emotional world does.
Uh-huh.
But the emotional world does not have the solar plexus.
That's wild.
And think about it.
Right.
Think about, I call it the emotional angelic world.
Ah.
And it's the spiritual archetypal world.
Mm,
Why? Because when we sleep, we're in the collective soup and we're getting dreams and images and symbols, all the archetypes.
mm,
The emotional world is a world where we're here to take emotional reactivity that begins physiologically.
mm,
If we think about the physiology of emotion, there's always a trigger to emotional reactivity.
mhm,
If we're not emotionally triggered, we may be emotional, but it's a loving, compassionate, higher level frequency emotion. And it's not reactive. It doesn't take mental world stuff as personal.
mm,
It's living in a transpersonal state.
mm,
So the notice that the emotional world has the 59th gate portal.
mm,
Now, when I was doing the lectures with Ra between 2000 and 2002, he did talk about portals in the matrices. And he mostly talked about it in the spiritual world, the three portals, the 62, the 12, and the 19. And I wrote the Beyond Human Design book recently, I put in all 148 of the integrated channels. So there's some channels that are only in one world,
I see.
but some, the mental world is always in another world. So if you have something, let's say you have the 1762, that's going to be in the mental world, and it's going to be a portal in the spiritual world.
I see.
So you're going to read the 1762 as an integrated channel, because it's not just mental if it's activated in the spiritual world. You have the 1762. That's going to be in the mental world, and it's going to be then you're going to always bring a spiritual essence to it.
Got it.
And in the emotional world, if somebody has the 59, that's a portal that they have to transform emotional reactivity. Whereas if somebody, let's say somebody's a manifester between the 35, 36, or the 1222, we can see that the emotion can get triggered from the mental world or the physical world. And then we have to transform it in some way. Because, and we know from the lie detector tests that emotions are triggered on a subliminal physiologic level before they become conscious. So it's validation for the way the matrices work. And I've been working with these matrices for 20 years. But I didn't realize that, for one thing, they're a double helix. They're the infinity sign, that's the double helix up the back.
I see.
But it's also, when I became a Tai Chi Gong teacher, I was standing at my husband's bedside doing a prayer and doing figure eights, doing Tai Chi Gong. And the voice said to me, this is October 2022. The voice said to me, your layout in Noble Energy Maps is the four worlds, and it's the figure eight. You know what you have. You know what it is. When are you going to make it public? I went, oh. So I waited a week. And I'm doing my Tai Chi Gong again, and the voice said, you know what you have, you know what it is, what are you waiting for? So I went to my Tai Chi, one of my Tai Chi groups, and I said to them, this voice told me I have to go public with my work. So I told them what it was, and 15 people signed up for readings. I said, I'll do readings for anyone who wants them. And so as I began to work with people who understood the four worlds by doing Tai Chi Gong, I was getting unbelievable validation. And then the doors opened.
Beautiful.
And the real work I have to do is write a book about the four world personality theory. It's not doing design. I don't want to compete with the design people. My real work is changing the way psychology is done. Because in my clinical work, and I've been a private practice clinician for over 50 years. So I've seen that I needed to get a lot of skills in each world in order to be really clinically effective.
Mm,
And we now have a tool that documents it, that documents that the four worlds from the tree of life are real,
mm,
and that the sacred geometry has a meaning, and and every patient I saw in my practice, the real hurt was that their spirit wasn't acknowledged.
mm,
They weren't seen, they weren't heard, they
mhm,
weren't acknowledged. They didn't even learn to acknowledge their own energy sensitivity.
mhm,
And most people, when they're born, see energy.
mhm,
I've seen auras since I was born. So my first memory when I
mm.
was a month old is of seeing auras.
Ah,
And I didn't know what it was.
mhm,
And I didn't remember it until 1976.
okay.
That, oh, I've seen, that's what that memory was.
Mhm,
My analysts, my training analysts couldn't tell me
uh-huh.
because it wasn't the mental world.
Mm,
It was spiritual world.
mhm,
And if the psychology people and coaches are not reading the spirit world
mm,
and treating it as a valid integrative part of our consciousness, we can't really be healers.
mm.
And so I'm starting to teach the four worlds actually this week. I have a
Beautiful.
class of people doing the four worlds and human design. And then
Mm,
I have a group of human design practitioners doing human design, multidimensional, noble energy maps, and the four worlds.
uh-huh.
Because you can't do one without the other, in my view.
Got it.
And to begin to understand the language of each world
Right.
and the way each world thinks, because
Mm.
we're different frequencies.
And I'm curious how, I mean, thank you. All of that was beautiful. Thank you so much for walking us all through that with you. I'm curious how you work with somebody who maybe started with human design as their entry point to this information. Like, I guess here's where my question is. What happens to, let's say, if human design defines me as an emotional generator, but the noble maps define me as a manifesting generator, or in your case, I don't know if you're a manifesting generator, but how you were talking about your lunar map.
I become, yeah, well, I use all of them. In your mental world,
Hmm.
you are a generator. Yes. In the other worlds, you may be a projector, you may be a reflector, you may be a manifesting generator. The point is that if we begin to work with the body maps as a flow of energy in consciousness, then they all integrated when you were 3 months old. Example, in you, you're a generator.
Hmm.
And I use Chiron in all of my designs because in the 1900s, Chiron was active. It was already discovered. And in traditional psychology, when a planet is identified, if it's relevant, we use it.
Mm.
So that happened with Pluto, and we put Pluto or Uranus or Neptune in charts of people who were born 100 years ago. So I use Chiron. I studied Magi astrology, and the Magi astrology people believed that Chiron was one of the most important planetary bodies in showing somebody's talents and gifts. So I always use it because to me, it shows me something about life purpose.
Mm.
Now, in your design, you have Chiron, well, you're a split definition generator in human design. My husband just arrived home, so the dogs can go.
No problem.
So in your spiritual design, you would be a split definition projector.
Right.
In your emotional, a single definition projector,
Mm.
and the same in your physical. Postnatally, now these correspond to developmental sequences. So postnatal physical projector, postnatal emotional projector, postnatal spiritual, you're a projector,
Mhm.
postnatal mental, you are a split definition manifesting generator. But if we look at your composite, look what happens. You get the 4629 and you get the 345710. So you become an extremely strong manifesting generator.
Mhm.
What that means is if you look at each world, you begin to get a sense, if you feel into it. And I don't use it formulaically. Everybody's design is like a fingerprint, each
Mm.
one is unique. And so I look at where the energy hooks up, where does it connect, and where does it disconnect, and which worlds. So if you go back, then we see that you have the 46 in the postnatal mental and the prenatal mental, and you get the 29 in the spiritual, postnatal spiritual.
Mhm.
So when I see something like that, I would be saying to you, before you commit to something that you have any doubts about,
Right.
wait a week, because you may be saying yes when it's not exactly the right thing for you to do.
Mm.
And any channels that are coming up the central column are part of the Satsuma. So in your composite, you have the 1-8, and you have the 2, and you have the 46, and then you get the 29, and you get the 10 hooking up to the 5734. So when you know what you know, because you know it,
Mhm.
and it comes from deep inside of you, spirit, nobody can dissuade you from what you know is right. And
Yeah, when
nobody
you
should try.
well, when that was one of the like that our conversation uh where you read my charts or my maps, that really blew for me because I loved how you said it's not me being stubborn, it's that depth of knowing. And it's
Yes.
interesting because it's like as we're talking about it, my belly's like I've been feeling a volcano energy inside of me for long time, but I've
Oh,
always been like, hide it, make it smaller, don't let it erupt. And I've been waiting for this, oh, there's truth in this fire of energy that wants expression. And yeah, when I know something, but I can't validate it, it's really a struggle. I need the people in my life to welcome. Name, what do you see? What do you sense?
well, you don't actually. And um, because you have the 5432,
Hmm.
let's see what it is.
It's everywhere.
4 is your north node,
Hmm.
and the 32 is Uranus. So the 32 is in the physical world. The 54 is in the physical world and the mental world and the emotional world. So when you get my book, read the integrated channel for that.
Okay.
Because what that says is that when you're setting goals for yourself in the mental world, those goals need to be spiritually aligned.
Hmm.
They need to be physically acceptable to you.
Hmm.
You should not ever be pushing yourself physically when a goal isn't exactly energetically resonating with you,
Hmm.
because that um, disrupts the flow of energy. See, the flow of energy is in all four worlds, whether we know it or not.
Hmm.
So when you begin to recognize, and what I'm coming to as I'm working with it and teaching it, is that what I'm really talking about are subtle energy patterns that Freud described as ego, id, and superego. Jung described it as the collective unconscious or the personal unconscious. And I'm saying, wait a minute, it's more than that. It's that we're multifaceted, multidimensional beings, and we're functioning in different dimensions or worlds. And all of those are active in those worlds with a lot more ability to be conscious if we know how to look for them.
Mm.
So when, for example, I look and say, well, wait a minute, the spiritual world is connecting the tasks that are right for you. If it's not spiritually aligned with you, you
Right.
should say no.
Right.
Because if it's not spiritually aligned with you, you're being asked to take on the energy of the other person.
Hmm.
And you lose the sacral center in everything except the mental world.
Right.
So if you're not using that internal sacral knowing, then you can make mistakes.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying they're bad mistakes, but you may agree to something
Yep.
that you would know not to agree to.
Yep.
The way I learned about this actually was with my daughter,
Mm.
is a manifesting generator,
Mm.
34, 57, 20. And then she loses it. So at one point she said to me, and this was right around the time I was writing the dream book, and I had defined the five types. And she said to me, I think we're going to stay in Portland, and my husband's going to make a movie, and we'll just wait a year, and that way, and then we'll come home.
Hmm.
And I knew that was wrong with her.
Mm.
She was already ready to go into practice and do her thing.
Got
And
it.
I said to her, well, maybe you could do that. I said, but maybe why don't you make that decision and live with it
Mm.
for about a week,
Mm.
looking at her where things turn on and off. I
Hmm.
said, live with that for about a week. And then after that week, ask yourself again, is it uh-huh or uh-uh?
Hmm.
So she did that. And she called me 2 days later and said, I can't do it. I can't
Hmm.
do it. I can't stay here.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
coming back to California. So I immediately realized that when somebody is defined as a manifesting generator, if they're not taking spirit into account, then they may, it may not be right for them.
Hmm.
You need all your bodies to say yes,
Right. Right. Which is
because
an
we're
in
not,
sorry.
go on.
Well, and that's interesting, right? Like, solar plexus definition means we sleep on it. And that feels like it was a good introduction for me to slow down and to understand why I'm slowing down. And now hearing this perspective of all of the alignments between the various worlds, that's
Why
another
would
layer of it.
why would Ra have said if you're emotionally defined, sleep on it.
Right.
Because in the emotional matrix, we have no solar plexus.
Hmm.
You lose it.
Right.
And so spiritually, it's gone.
Right.
And then you come back into your body,
Hmm.
and maybe it's there and maybe it's not there.
Right. Right.
So Ra was, he said a lot of things that he intuitively was right about,
Hmm.
but now we have the backup as to why it works.
Right. And I wonder if you want to speak to that, like how I remember it from our previous conversation, but the piece where he was asking you to scientifically prove it, or you and your husband to scientific, could
Yes,
you
and
speak to that?
sure. Ra and I broke contact.
Mm,
And then I was contacted by Chetan, I think. And he said, Ra's in trouble. He's
mm,
bankrupt. He had a premature baby and he's wiped out. And he broke with Zeno and Chaitanya, and he has no money to get back to Ibiza.
mm,
Would you let him and his family come stay with you? And can you fill his schedule with patients, with clients? So I said, let me speak to Marvin. And Marvin and I said, we know that Ra is a little bit of a scoundrel,
mm,
but the message was a valid message
mm,
and it's a valuable message, and we have to do what we have to do. So we said yes. Ra arrived at our home uh, alone. And after about 3 or 4 days, he said to Marvin and to me, I would like to tell you everything the voice told me.
mm,
I'll spend however much time it takes.
mm,
I'll come and I'll stay with you and we'll record everything. And I will tell you everything the voice told me if you will agree to validate it scientifically
mhm,
and have a legal contract that we are doing this for the professional community, that I want this to be proven. And um, he wanted Marvin and me. I'm a social scientist. My PhD is University of Chicago, and my dissertation was very extensive statistically.
mm,
And Marvin's a double boarded MD. So he wanted Marvin to do the clinical medical validation and for me to do the statistical psychological validation. And uh, he literally did not know what to do with some of the material.
mm,
So we, I said, I didn't really want to do it. And Marvin said, let's do it.
mm,
So I went along with it, and then it fell on me to do. So we spent, we uh, formed a legal partnership. Um, we registered it and the whole deal.
mhm,
We were 50-50 partners. The agreement was that we would teach professionals, that Ra would continue to do the general human design for the general public. And he was saying it needed to be dumbed down to the fourth grade level.
gotcha.
And he told me, you're not good at dumbing things down. Yes, I know that.
Mhm,
Um, so we agreed, we contacted lawyers, we did the whole deal. He came back, it could have been May, and then he came back in June and spent several weeks. Tom Pfeiffer, who had bootlegged stuff for me because he
mm,
didn't want me leaving design, came and recorded everything. So I have recordings of everything
mm,
to this day.
mhm,
And we have everything transcribed, and we turned them into books, and we turned them into classes.
mm,
And I self-published everything with Ra, and I copyrighted everything. So as we worked, um, I was able to validate, and at the Santa Fe meeting, I will present some of the statistics.
Hmm.
When I talk about Ra and our relationship, I'll share the statistics.
Hmm.
Type, there's no question. There are 5 types, not 4. And Ra agreed there are 5 types, not 4, but he was going to keep teaching 4
Hmm.
because his ego wouldn't let him change. He
Mm.
said that to me. And so type held, centers held by factor analysis. I didn't write a paper about the centers, but when I look at the output, if it was a square, there were 4 factors. If it was a triangle, there were
Mm.
3 factors.
Gotcha.
So we know that the structure has some validity.
Mm.
And then when I did the dream stuff, and I wanted to see if the type, what type would be in a dream design. And I did those statistics.
Mm.
So we have the statistics for type in the waking dream and the sleep dream. And then I did the triple design matrix, meaning the waking, the dream, and the sleep. So I could see if the structure held across the matrices.
Mm.
And it did.
Mm.
What I did also test, I tested circuits, I tested channels,
Mm.
I tested tones, colors, bases, um, definition of type, so split, single, those held. Um, Profile did not hold.
Mm.
It's a mathematical artifact of the hexagram structure in the body map. So while the regularity of occurrence in a general population can be predicted, how many 1 3s or 2 4s or 3 5s, that's absolutely 100% predictable. And um, it's predictable across the board, but you can't give meaning to it.
Mm.
You can't say every third line 3 5 responds the same as every other 3 5,
Mm.
because you have to look at what planet is in it, where it is in their chart.
Mm.
The astrology needs to be integrated more into the interpretation. And
Gotcha.
so what I do instead of using profile is I use the keywords,
Mm.
because the keywords for the 8, and if you go back to your chart, you can see it, shows a progression of energy. And those keywords are based on the sun and the earth and the moon and what I call its shadow, because there's no opposition to the moon. There are keywords underneath each image. So
Hmm.
yours are, what are they? Explanation, 4 ways,
Mm.
alpha, the alpha. Isn't that interesting? And then challenge or defiance. The alpha comes in with the 4629. And that's the central channel that gives you the power.
Wow. So you're not, so what I'm hearing is like the profile. So if human design would put me in the bucket of a 3 5 person profile, you're what I'm hearing is what's maybe in this perspective is looking at the incarnation cross themes in these
Yes.
different worlds.
I think those are much more meaningful
Mm.
than a formulaic interpretation of the line,
Hmm.
because the keywords are coming from the lines.
Yeah.
And I'm also using the moon. So that's the 4 ways. So spiritually, you're being told through the keywords that in order to understand the full consciousness, you need to integrate the worlds.
Hmm.
four ways is the four worlds.
Right.
And that is going to bring you spiritually to your power, the alpha. It's right there.
I know. It's just, how do I communicate? Holy shit!
Exactly.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Yep.
So, I don't want to um, upset the human design community,
Mm.
but my task from Ra was to
Mhm.
do the research as a
Mhm.
professional,
Yeah.
and when the research was ready to make it public.
Right.
And I'm not here to say human design is worthless, but I'm saying open your minds to the
Mm.
fact that it's an incomplete system.
Wow.
There's so much more than one chart
Yeah.
and one formula. And when we open up to the energy that we can calculate, I mean, what a beautiful gift Ra gave us
Mhm.
by giving us the lunar design.
Mhm. Mm.
And, now we have a system that shows we do have choice.
Mm.
I absolutely 100% believe that Ra was wrong about no choice.
Uh-huh. Can I just pause you for 1 minute? My quad left is like put food in my body, and I'm happy
Yes.
to keep going, but I'll be right back. 2 minutes. Mm.
It's very interesting that the image behind you is like a triangle.
Oh.
And I'm thinking about your chart and the
Oh.
openness in those centers, and how by putting yourself in that triangle, it's as though you're finding nature protecting you.
Do you know how hard it is to do this interview and not cry, Eleanor?
Um,
Wow.
I'm touched to touch you so much.
Because the other thing that you said in the reading was how like I'm gonna cry through my words, but that in nature, that's when the communication comes through. And so what you're saying about the triangle in this, because it's just an image, not just an image, but how did I choose the image? I don't know.
No, but now you're sitting in front of it and it's behind you. So it's almost like, I mean, if I look at the postnatal lunar design, it's almost as though the trees are behind you and then the rest of you is in front of it receiving the energy through a clear channel.
Yep. Oh, you are powerful. What moves through is really powerful.
Well, Nama, it's right there. We just have to open the door
Hmm.
and then play with it and be creative with it. And human design. So it's no stretch for you to take and know what you know about the worlds
Yep.
and then put them, reinterpret the body graph using what you know about the worlds. What does it mean if you have the 4521 in the mental world only, and then in the spiritual world and the physical, emotional worlds, you have Chiron in the 21 and you lose the 45? How do you make sense out of that?
I feel like a tiger that's like, what is mine to like dig my teeth into and get after? Um, and what I'm curious about reframing or turning the hologram with is this this gift of understanding that the fact that I feel this need to control things isn't maybe toxic.
It's not at all toxic because it's coming from spirit, and you're only using it if you can be of a help to somebody.
Right. Yeah. So what I sense in our interactions is this, like, I guess that fire and that push again, that I was naming within myself of like, this needs to be out there. Like I don't set like it feels really clean and pure from
Mhm.
you. This needs to be out there. So yeah, however I can support and participate that feel aligned, I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you. So for me, it's I want to turn this work
Mm.
over to the human design people who are open to it. And
Ah.
then I want to do the Four World book
Mm.
because nobody else can do it.
Hmm.
You know, spiritual is clean language,
Hmm.
mental world is active listening, relationship work is imago speech, or, I need to put that, I need to outline the map of consciousness that this really is
Hmm.
and give practitioners the skills they need, and I'm recommending to my clients, all of them, on my website, there's a link to some Tai Chi Gong teachers who we
Ah.
vetted. So they do online Tai Chi Gong classes for like $10 a
Uh-huh.
class.
Uh-huh.
So if people are, and I did a podcast doing the four worlds, the figure eights.
Mm.
So when people do the figure eights, if they get emotionally reactive, it balances them.
Right. Right. Right.
It's
Right.
there. I have so many tools
Yeah.
that, and then my cosmic guidance book is looking at the transits every day and giving advice in the four worlds.
Mm.
So there's a lot to do. There's,
Beautiful.
like none of Ra's circuits held.
Mm.
So, and that was an afterthought that he came, he had nothing. Zeno, Chaitanya, and he came up with type. And initially, they only had to do or to wait, and then the splits.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of things evolved and were good stories, but that doesn't mean they're science.
Right.
And some of them seem to hold, even though the circuit didn't hold. So we need
Mm.
more clinical data that is social psychology
Hmm.
or social anthropology, not hard statistics, because the statistics would come from the responses of the people, not from the structure of the body map.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
because
that's not something that I have had the manpower to do.
and it's so if I'm tracking what you're saying, like the mystical way, I don't see that represented in the spiritual map. So is that what you're saying that the mystical way doesn't hold?
Yeah, no, none of the circuits,
Okay.
like his mystical circuit, his tribal circuit, his individual,
Oh.
when you take all of those channels
Mm.
and you say, do they have factors in common? They don't.
Gotcha.
So that means each channel may be a unit in itself, or the channels in some way, there's 32 paths of intelligence in the tree of life. You multiply that by 12
Mm.
and you get 384.
Mm.
That means there's a correlation mathematically between the paths and the tree of and the body graph. So when we figure out which path, and we can do it astrologically, hits which hexagram and which line of the hexagram,
Mm.
then we may get the factors. It may be then that all three lines, for example, have a common factor, or all six lines have a common factor. Or we may find that two channels have this common factor, but Ra didn't have it exactly right.
Gotcha.
He was
Gotcha.
on the right track, that there are things that come together in the body maps, but are they coming together cross dimension? Are they coming together within each dimension? In the tree of life, the four worlds each have their own separate meaning
Mm,
along each of the 32 paths of intelligence.
got it.
So there's much more complexity to
Mm,
be coded through than we're this far in.
got it. Got
And
it.
and my hope is that I can put together a team of people
Mm,
with integrity who are not going to fudge anything
right.
and who want to go out and do real research
Right.
so
That's
that we
exciting.
have, I'm going to do the book, but then if we had research and a
Mm,
personality instrument that we could submit to the psychological testing people
mm,
and get a real instrument that could be utilized appropriately, it would
mhm.
change the face of consciousness.
Wow.
I
Wow.
mean, it's overwhelming.
Mm, yeah.
I'm, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
fortunately, I'm very blessed to have a family that's so supportive.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and in bringing us to a closure, what would you recommend for people as their next steps if, as they're listening to this, they feel the draw? Like this audience is for the people who are coming to the conference who will engage with your talks or your presentations, and it might be other people. So, what would you say is the next steps that you'd
The
encourage?
next step is to get a noble energy map.
Hmm.
You can go to www.nobleenergymap.com.
Hmm.
That will give you a free introductory report.
Yeah.
And if you want I will send PDF to you of the Four World ebook,
Ah,
and feel free to give that out.
okay.
Uh, and when I do a lecture on the Four Worlds, I'll give that out as well.
Okay.
Um, but it should be available. And if human design people, it's a wonderful system, but
Hmm.
it's incomplete. It doesn't show the full consciousness.
Mm,
And you're more than a formula and a type.
mm,
So when you open to the integrated matrices and you begin to work with them and look at the flow of your energy, you'll realize that more than 95% of the population are here to manifest their potential. At the age of 3 months old,
mm,
everybody is developed to the point that they have volition. When a baby reaches for an object,
mm,
X object rather than Y object, it's proof that they're making a choice.
mhm,
We have choice.
mhm,
We choose to study human design or not. We
mhm,
choose to do research or not.
mhm,
So, open to there being a lot more to learn,
mm,
and it's much easier than learning all of the specifics
mm,
because you're looking at a flow of energy
mhm.
and it's intuitive. And if you've studied human design, I would make a bet that I'd probably win most of the time that you're somebody interested in growth and consciousness.
Mm,
And if you're interested in growth and consciousness, then using a formulaic system that limits how you think about yourself is not as growthful and conscious as you could be.
mm. Yeah.
So my mission from Ra was to do the science
Mm.
and appeal to the more professional population who wanted science and clinical work. Because remember, I'm a clinician working with patients, some of whom were very disturbed. And I was using this instrument to
Mm.
heal them.
Mm. Mm.
And doing that research with knowing their dreams, knowing how it fit in the matrices. And I've been doing that for 25 years.
Mm.
So um, I've written books.
Mhm.
My book, Cosmic Secrets, which some of you are going to get as a gift, or Astrology Essentials, two areas that are essential to integrate.
Mm.
In the Noble Energy Map program and in the program my son is writing, the hexagrams and the planetary glyphs will also have the astrology signs,
Gotcha. Wow.
because we need to add the astrology
Mm.
into the nuance of the hexagram and the planet.
Got it.
You
Got
know,
it.
let's say the sun is in Leo. It's very different than a sun in Pisces.
Mm.
And depending, they could both be in the same gate.
Mhm.
So we need to begin to integrate more nuance
Mhm.
into the way we read even a human design chart,
Mhm.
and then expand it to the consciousness of yourself as a human being, fully capable of manifesting your full potential,
Mm.
not just the mental world, which is never going to satisfy you,
Mm.
but the spirit.
Mm.
It's the spiritual world that's the
Yep.
integrated world. That's why
Mhm.
you sleep every night.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for this time,
thank
darling.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was gorgeous. All of this feels like a transmission. If I going into like logical
Well,
stuff.
if you ask me an hour from now what we said, I'll have no recollection.
Awesome. Awesome. Or maybe that's frustrating from your side. I don't know. But to
I
me,
just, when I'm working, I'm basically gone.
ah,
So I don't remember any of it.
aha,
And then if I'm with a client, I'll remember dreams they told me 20 years ago. But
aha,
if you ask me what we did in a session, I have
aha.
no idea.
Got it. Got it.
It's really interesting.